Hello, and welcome to the Transfer Flow podcast. My name is Ted Knutson, and on today's episode, we are going to take a scan around Europe and do some buy-sell rounds for what's going on in the other leagues besides the Premier League, and take a look at Premier League relegation. So, is someone besides Atletico Madrid going to be number 3 in La Liga? We're also going to look at, can another team win Ligue 1 this year? Is Roma going to finish second in Serie A in the madness of the Italian league? That's probably the most fun to watch in Europe. And beneath Bayern Munich, who are going to win that league no matter what is that sort of Champions League ranking set going to stack out as we play the rest of the season? So stay tuned. It's a great episode, and thank you so much for listening. So we are here with a different dynamic this week in that it's Hayden and myself. And those of you who are confused, I'm the bald guy and he's not. Patrick is always very hairy as well. I think Hayden's working more towards me than he is Patrick. I think Patrick has like the long term, I'm going to have an awesome hairline thing. And I just never did. My dad was always like a horrible harbinger of that future. Right. So we have football to talk about. That's what we're going to do. But we're not going to talk about so much about the Premier League this week. We will have a bit. We're going to talk about some relegation candidates there, but we're going to like take a look around Europe and we're going to do a buy sell. And for those of you who grew up on like Around the Horn and stuff like, God, what's the Tony Kornheiser show? Yes, pardon the interruption. Thank you so much. This was like pioneering ESPN stuff where they had takes, but they were like knowledgeable takes. And Hayden only spits knowledge, unlike Patrick and I, where we're just here for the inflammatory type stuff. Yeah, so we're going to start in Spain, which I know you guys have talked about on the Wednesday pod anyway. And the important question for Spain is really, can Villarreal crack that top 3? Because I know you guys have talked a ton about Atletico Madrid, about their early season rockiness and how Simeone always seems to stabilize the ship there. They just got bought for huge money. Majority owners came in and took over Atletico Madrid. If you haven't followed that, it's been all over the media during the off week. What do you think? I have some thoughts, but I think you guys are more knowledgeable than I am about this particular league. If you want to talk women's football, I'm going to be a little more there, but that's just my day job.
Yeah, I think Villarreal are a team that made some pretty interesting transfer moves, kind of looking to add attacking options to their group. And defensively, they've been really robust. They added Renato Vega at the back, a signing I think kind of as a group we were really excited about, added a lot to their team. And the big question is, can they get these different offensive weapons clicking? Because Atleti have the bigger budget and have some really top international players in their group. So that was always going to be kind of the question. And it's a tricky one because I think we're really positive, especially Patrick and myself, on Atleti adding a bit more of the possession game, being able to sit on top of teams with the ball. We're sort of like, this is what we asked for. They're kind of doing it. And Villarreal are interesting to me because I think there's this dynamic where in terms of watching a team, when I watch them in Champions League, they haven't had a good start to the Champions League campaign. And so
that's been frustrating for me because I've been wagering on this La Liga information in the Champions League. So I know where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a little bit of the ripple here is like, I've seen them a little bit in La Liga and they look the part. They look like they're putting these things together and they're strong. And then in the high profile Champions League games, the Champions League games are at an awesome time slot for the American time zone audiences, and being able to watch those. So like I've paid a lot of attention to it, and they've sort of failed to impress there. So I think that sort of like tempers my view because everything from a data standpoint, everything I would have said outside of that, if I can sort of separate that, is really positive, and I'd almost like kind of be willing to back them a little bit and really get behind it. But I think
the entire package
gives
gives you like a little bit
exactly.
of discomfort there. What I found interesting doing the research on this one was like basically the top 4 teams in Spain right now have identical expected goal differences. Like they're within like a tenth of a goal of expected goal difference, but they do it on entirely different shots profiles. So as we've kind of been mentioned, as I flagged up like very early in my Twitter conversations when doing Champions League research for Real Madrid, if you're interested, like, I do the variance betting column, we write about it. I'll comment on that stuff on our social media. And in this one, like Real Madrid have very much gone back to like sort of the 2010 to 2015. We're going to take lots of shots. We're going to not allow that many shots, but like shot quality is going to be shaky. And that means you're kind of riding the variance wave. They're, using the fact that they still have some of the best players in the world off of the back of that to do that. Barcelona last year, clearly more dominant in terms of the expected goal difference. This year, like they've fallen backwards, partly because I think there's some tiredness in the legs, partly because different players have been injured. Yamin Lamal's been handling injury issues. We know that they're always injured, but basically the exact same sets of numbers, a little bit better shot differential. Then you had Villarreal. Villarreal have 13 shots or 13.6 shots that they take a game and 12.25 conceded. So unlike almost a 20 and 10 where you're at Real Madrid or 20 and 8.4 with Barcelona, like this is a very close shot differential. But obviously, if you only give up bad shots and if you only take great shots, like that's a big difference. I think Villarreal are probably the most intriguing team in La Liga this year, more so than Atletico, who I think are probably second. Just the fact that they have to sell every year and they do it really well. You never hear about Atleti having a player pried out of their squad that they didn't want to go. But it seems like every year, and we know this partly because Robbie's a big fan, and Robbie was one of the original podcasters on the roster before he got sucked back into the world of football. Robbie's like, yep, we got to sell these 3 players this year, but hopefully they're pretty good. The new replacements are pretty good next year. And they do a really good job. And I think that their early resume suggests that they can be in and around that top 3. But, there's always the differential in like depth of squad. There's a little bit of differential in like, you wouldn't say that Villarreal and Atletico Madrid have the same quality throughout, 1 to 11 either.
Yeah, I mean, I was messaging with Ravi about Yeremy Pino, who's gone to Crystal Palace and just looks so excellent. And they've replaced a guy like that with sort of the Canadian players who are maybe not as sexy in the world of soccer. Like this isn't Brazil or Argentina or something like that. Like these are, Olo Asai is a guy that played at St. John's and played in the USL Championship. So these are guys that are maybe not as sexy, but they've really done a good job of profiling like what their team is. They want to be they're strong defensively in all different phases. I think that's the thing about this Villarreal team that gives me the most belief that they can have some longevity and buy themselves time to like get the right balance on offense, because they know their offensive balance isn't just going to be roll the same dudes out every week. There's going to be rotation. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to be able to hit teams in transition, and they're going to have to be able to control the game a bit more against weaker teams. And they've added speed. They've added some individual directness, either with players that can run or a guy like Tejan Buchanan that can dribble the ball, beat someone 1v1 and create that mismatch. And so the defense of this team is what gives me sort of the lasting belief, or that little bit of hope that they can maybe get in front of Atleti, who are kind of more in this stylistic transition, because their defense is really robust. And hopefully by time for this offense to continue to improve and get to a more elite level than it is right now. It's not that it's been bad so far, but it's going to need to improve to get them into that top tier. That's sort of how I see it.
I think that's fair. I think it's interesting also that Canada has higher end top tier players than the United States these days, but that's a World Cup story that we'll cover, I think, probably in May. All right. So you buy and sell in Villarreal as third or better.
Yeah, it's really tough. I'm like, this is one of the ones of these topics where I'm like,
all I hear from you is waffle right now, Hayden Van Brewer. Yeah. Come on, take a stand.
I'm waffling. I'm probably sell, because I'm thinking Atleti with new funding are going to come in and they have a higher chance of pushing that on in the second half of the year. So I'm unfortunately sell, but I'm close on it.
I'm sell. I'm appreciating the degree of difficulty in which they're operating. I think it's also notable that like Real Betis in fifth are maybe 20 points or 0.20 points off of expected goal difference as well. So another pretty good team there. And then the other side of it is Sevilla, who are ninth right now, but have probably one of the bottom 4 expected goal differences in that league. Like you might think about them sort of as a fade for the rest of the season. So we're a moderate sell, I would say. We like the optimism though. We feel like they've done a good job. All right, moving on to the land of pasta. We have seen AS Roma be possibly the most interesting rebuild of the summer coming into this season. I think Atalanta had decided it was time to move on from Gasperini. Mostly that was behind the scenes stuff about he's slightly challenging to work with, a bit like Conte. There is a sort of like shelf life in dealing with him. Obviously did amazing things at Atalanta though. So he comes to AS Roma. And Roma need a rebuild. They had lots of difficulties over the years. They were not finishing regularly in the Champions League places. He comes in, and right now, we look at the top of that Serie A table. We've got Inter Milan at 24 points, Roma at 24 points, AC Milan at 22, Napoli at 22, Bologna at 21, and Juventus at 19. Now, this is through 11 matches. I think Juventus have already fired their their head coach. Atalanta, who actually have probably the second best expected goal difference in the whole league, also fired their head coach because they're down in 13th as opposed to up there in that top tier. Now, the buy sell that we have today is Roma in second at the end of the season. What do we think there? Because that Serie A is the most competitive big league in the top tier. Like, they were really fun last year. They're pretty much really fun every year. You see more goals scored there than anywhere else. But Gasperini in season one, can he finish in second?
I'm kind of a sell here. I'm not feeling confident. I think there's a lot of parity at the top, and there's a few teams that I think are stronger or at least a bit more coherent right now. So I think that's sort of my pessimism here. I think the Roma team to finish in those sort of places, to be up in first or second, there's still sort of another evolution that needs to take place. I think this first year, there's a little bit of feeling out the types of players. It's a different squad than the Atalanta squad, and so I think like Gasperini a little for himself is finding out what are the types of players I need to add. What do I like that I have here that I maybe didn't have at Roma, and vice versa. So I think there's going to be some shuffling that's going on over this year, and I don't think, from what I've seen so far, that they're at the stage where it's like that has settled and now they're kind of full steam ahead. I think they're still a step off it. But what do you think about them?
I think unlike all the other kind of elite teams in and around them, they don't have a defense that's good enough to sort of leave them in second. And I think that will come to bite them over time. One of the interesting things that Gasperini has brought to the table tactically in that league is like they do play a slightly different style than almost everybody else. It feels like slightly non-Italian in the way that he's pulled it off. Doesn't have the weapons that he used to have that can really change games. And that combination of not having the weapons plus not being as elite defensively means that over the course of the season, they'll probably find more bumps than they would otherwise. Now, it's also like a good sign that, you know, they're doing this well early on in his reign, because like he is a slightly interesting coach tactically. It takes time for the players to bed in. It takes learning for them to bed in. So I think that like the early signs are positive and optimistic, but I would not say that I expect them to finish second. I think they'll be on the cusp of the Champions League, but like there's a danger that Juve are going to bump up there and steal a spot. Like that Juve team, we had said, which is really weird, actually. We said really nice things about Juve's recruitment over kind of the last 2 years. They were not sort of doing crazy things with the magic money tree, and so like I think that they've got some talent and some depth. Whether the new coach is going to align the performance with the results will be a good question, but Roma fans, I love your kids. It's a really interesting place to play football, but I don't think that you're going to be quite this happy at the end of the season. Maybe you might sneak that fourth spot in the Champions League.
Yeah, I think at the top end of it, Inter Milan are really strong and really exciting, and there's a lot to be said for Kivu. With Juve, I think we see the upside with Spalletti a little bit and feel like there's possibly more to get out of the team. And once we start going through that, like AC Milan, if they can figure out how to coordinate this offense and like improve the defense while still having the upside of Leao and some of these guys on the field, then there's enough other teams that you're sort of like, I'm not taking Roma just yet.
Okay, sounds good. All right, we're going to move over to the Germans. The Germans have one team that is so absurdly good. Like I cannot 1.51 expected goal difference for Bayern Munich versus the rest of the league. The next closest in that league is Leverkusen, which is also very interesting. But do we think that Leipzig, Dortmund, Stuttgart is the most likely kind of finishing segment for second, third, fourth in that league? Do we think that Leverkusen can overcome that initial bobble from Eric Ten Hag, who seemed to piss off everybody both in Leverkusen and elsewhere, really, in recent times? Like, or how do you think that that's going to shake out? Because we know that Munich are going to win the league. Like, it won't even be close. It's so absurd. But then everybody else, maybe there's a chance for some new blood in there.
Yeah, I think Dortmund and Leipzig are the teams that I see as like they will finish in that top group. They really should finish in that top group. That four spot really gets interesting though, because I think Leverkusen, Stuttgart is in that position now, but also Frankfurt is a team. They're a young group of players. They are adapting with big sales and cash. And I think with a young team, you sort of have this feeling of as they can get things to click, as they can gel together more, there's some real upside for there. So like Frankfurt is a team that I'm constantly really positive on. And so it's sort of like a question of, for me, a little bit is it Stuttgart versus the field, or are we going to start talking here about like which team would you back? Because the Leverkusen one, like the underlying numbers are legitimately very good in a way that I think we didn't expect to see after the first sort of month
It,
or so of the
Yeah, they,
season.
they were basically taking a dump after the first 3 games, and like you listen to the media, they're like things are horrible at training. The club hierarchy is like, oh, we have made a huge mistake, and to their credit, they realized it and they fired fast, which is a really important thing to do. I think you're exactly right about Frankfurt, and I think that is probably the most interesting team to pay attention to, at least in terms of like table positioning. Something that kind of goes underreported is like how difficult it is to take a young squad and then like get them up to speed, right? And sometimes it works well. Usually it's the second year that kind of young squad with the same coach manages to bed in, because like there's a lot of technical training. If you have Europe, like you don't get nearly enough time. It's really, really hard from a coaching perspective. And this is actually one reason why I think, a lot of teams are trying to go for like a tactical lineage from like coach to coach. You could have some moderation inside of that, but players take time to learn stuff, and it takes time to give them feedback, and it takes a lot of training sessions to say, no, don't do it like that, do it like that. And so I think that you're right in that Frankfurt may be a team that has obviously sold really well, much like Villarreal do, but it seems like they already are performing possibly slightly above expectations given their sales. When I look at this league table, like, I think Leverkusen are second. And I think Leverkusen are second with really strong numbers. I don't think that Dortmund have been dominant in any way. They're better than they were under Shaheen, but they're not like good. They're just fine. And Leipzig is the one that's kind of all over the place. Like Leipzig used to be that they would have a good shot generation, but they would really suppress everybody's shots. They would really be excellent at keeping everybody else's shots. Like they'd press them out of existence. And then occasionally you get track meet games. That is not what this looks like. They're having the pace in that team. That games are almost 20 shots, 30 shots a game, 30 shots a game, 15 to 14, which I think is fun for a neutral, but very against type for what we expect from the classic kind of Red Bull archetypes. So I'm not sure what to think about that, other than I think lots of goals is good.
Yeah. For Dortmund, I kind of wanted to pose this question to you. How much would your view of Dortmund change if they had an injury to Adeyemi or Girassi? Because for me, when I see their team like in shape, Nico Kovac organized, I look at that team, and especially when I look at them in Champions League and seeing them against top teams, I really go like, Girassi is the player that really like forces other teams to defend them and compromise and do something uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
which then opens up a lot of space for other players. Again, they're playing with wing backs, so they have some really not just natural width, but they sort of already are asking the question of, are you going to jump your fullback this high, or are you
Yeah.
going to, sag and shift your winger? Like they're already asking that question, and Girassi is the player that sort of makes that challenging. Like how much would your view shift if one of those guys was injured, or something like that for a period of time? Because I think for me, that's where this question, I go like, well, when Dortmund's fully healthy, they look awesome, or they really have stuff that I think can be really strong. But actually, one player off, and my view changes a lot.
It's a little bit like the Newcastle of the Bundesliga in that like their first 11 is quite good, but if you miss like one or two players that are super important, like that's a big problem. And Newcastle this year, like obviously you lost Ishak, you've got Voltamata, different type of player. They have not sort of really got the track meet type guys on the wide spaces. And then they really, really depend on the fullbacks, as you say, to create that width, to create that attacking intent when they're in possession. So yeah, I'm kind of the same way. And I think Guirassy might be the most important injury in Champions League games right now. At least in kind of this Swiss stage. As we get into the knockouts, like there might be certain other teams where you're like, yeah, they're just not good against good teams if they don't have this guy. All right, so Germany, we don't think that this is even close to like the final rankings there. We kind of have two outside teams that you want to pay attention to in Leverkusen and Frankfurt versus the top four. Stuttgart look like the trailers there, but like if you get a chance, like watch some Leipzig games. Like that's just fun, and Germany in general is a different type of football than you will see elsewhere. So I think that's pretty enjoyable. All right, Farmers League time. Is someone else going to get the trophy this year in Ligue? Tell me, are you buying or sell not PSG to win Ligue?
I'm selling. I think it's going to be PSG. Patrick and I did the whole thing talking about Strasbourg and talking about all the good things Marseille are doing. They're really controlled, De Zerbi super control style of play. How they've added speed and this is sort of an interesting one from the transfer perspective of like it's really good when the guy you spend the most money on integrates into your team right away. Like,
yeah.
I think Igor Paixão is a signing that there's always the sort of Eredivisie sort of fear. But he's a player that I've watched a lot and was very good. And I sort of thought that this would be kind of the right level for him. Like if he had jumped and gone to a Real Madrid or a team like that, I'd be like, I don't think he'll play. But at this sort of level, I think he can be really excellent, and he's hit the ground running for the team. So, yeah, I think that has helped, but I just don't have enough confidence. I think PSG are too deep. I think there's maybe been fatigue in the legs. Obviously, they've wanted to start strong in Champions League, and they essentially have. Like, I just see them as being too strong for the next level of competition. Yeah, curious to hear what you have to say, but also I kind of wanted to throw out the question a little bit of like, what would be a win condition for a different team in Liga, let's say in the next 5 years? Like maybe it's, if it's not this year, then I think it's good for us to think about like what it would take for a team to put together a run. Like, does it have to be sort of what happened with Leicester City? Like what would be the conditions that we would see that as being possible to knock PSG off of their pedestal?
So focusing on this season right now, I think it's pretty interesting, but you have to have context around what's happened at PSG so far. So not only did they have like the most matches, from the Champions League last year, so deep into that, but some good attacking depth as well. But then obviously they go into Club World Cup, and it feels like a lot of the teams have suffered Club World Cup. I think that they have particularly, they have really not seen their attack kind of all together at once. I think also like Enrique knew that they were tired, probably isn't really dialing things up. And look at last year's split between first half of the season and second half of the season, and you kind of see the same PSG, right? Like it's not that they're playing themselves into shape like Shaq used to do, but they might be waiting to play themselves into shape in a tactical sense. And I think that is probably what's going on here. So not really sort of turning the screws. They were the best team in the world last year, and he got them to that point. And I think that they know how to do it. I think for someone else to start to challenge PSG, this year's really interesting, right? So what we're looking at in the 18 team league these days is we've got a 7 deep set of teams that are actually pretty good. So PSG are at a 0.50 expected goals. Marseille are 0.59. Lens are up there at 0.24. They'll probably fall back a bit. They've got inverted shot numbers, which means that they give up more shots than they take, which is always like a warning sign. That's usually a long-term unsustainable trend. Then you get Lille, who have the best expected goals in the league and often are up in that area, 0.72. Sorry, Strasbourg are in there 0.48. Strasbourg seem like the positive version of Chelsea. Like they're run a little bit better. They get the talent first, and then they just graduate onto the Chelsea team, or they make good sales. I'm intrigued by that one. I feel like I shouldn't be too mean. And then you get Monaco with 0.58 expected goals, who got rid of Adi Hütter, which usually Hütter has like a 2 to 3 year shelf life. The press is not doing what the press is supposed to do. They're basically giving up 12 and a half shots. They're conceding 12 and a half shots. Lyon also 11 and a half shots, 11. Like the reason why I mention these shot numbers is because, high volumes of shots and low volumes conceded are pretty correlated to success. And sometimes when you're shaking out between head coaches or like when you've got tactical issues, you'll see those numbers either be really weird or you'll see them be like strongly indicative that this is a good or a bad trending, even above and beyond the expected goals numbers. Especially early in the season, expected goals can be a little more volatile. Like this is an additional metric that we would look at. So I'm intrigued by like the depth of this league, and we know it's a good talent league. Not necessarily that they're great in Europe, although they had deeper runs last year than we might have expected. But the depth of the league is a good indicator, not a bad one. And I think that makes it intriguing to follow both from a talent perspective and can someone challenge PSG. Finally, with your question, I would say that if Enrique leaves, that might be a time for somebody else to swoop in and go after a title. Not that they need to spend a ton of money, but a different tactical setup, a different managerial setup always is a potential for a rocky start. And then, yeah, with a lot of depth there, like if PSG are kind of good but not great, like any number of these teams could end up taking that title.
Yeah,
it's not dead like Bayern feels like. It feels like the Bundesliga is not going to be competitive for like another 5 years.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's really scary to see how that one has evolved, because I think there was maybe some doubts initially, maybe with company or like that wouldn't go, and that's clicked in. And yeah, I mean, this PSG team under Enrique, it feels like there's really great understanding. There's a lot of budget, a lot of really good depth, and it feels like the team is also, because it's such a young team or has so many key players that are young, it feels like they can evolve, and it feels like, they have the Ballon d'Or winner. If Dembele is not available or he's declining, it feels like it actually doesn't hurt this team in a way that most teams losing a Ballon d'Or type player would really feel it in a significant way. Like if we think about the Barcelona and Real Madrid teams with Messi and Ronaldo, if they were missing those guys, they would feel it. That really is a missing a key piece. Whereas missing Dembele is not as significant to this team, partly because they miss him a lot anyways due to injury, but also because they have such flexibility and such talented young players that are continuing to improve and challenge for those spots. So
I think also like Bayern and PSG are two very different judgments from the outside and how well the club is run. I feel like PSG spends money more efficiently than they ever have before. Like, it feels like they're effective. It feels like they have depth. It feels like they actually understand what they get out of the academy, and either they sell really well or they integrate them pretty early, which is like very important. I feel like Bayern just have so much more money, and the teams that were getting close to competing with them like really fell apart in their decision-making process over the last 3 seasons. So you would have said, oh, Bayern are making mistakes. Like eventually it adds up to being expensive. But even when they've made mistakes, like their budget differential is so big that it hasn't really cost them too much. And you haven't had the other teams like in the Premier League have closer budgets and be smarter run. So it means that, Bayern are getting back to being a little bit smarter run at times, but it also feels like you can sell them players in different age ranges than you would be for the other smart teams. It's just that it's a money difference and also just like a real depth of talent. Like that first team squad is really good. Company has done a very good job. They knew that they wanted to integrate like Rene Merich, who's a longtime friend of ours. And, I've known him for like 11, 12 years now, is their assistant head coach. They've managed to do an incredible job from the coaching perspective. And this might be the year where they start to really figure out how to play against those other top talented teams, which they don't necessarily have to do in the Bundesliga, but it might be a good year for them in Champions League.
Just to echo that point, the period that allowed Xabi Alonso and this Leverkusen team to nick the title was in this sort of coaching transition moment for Bayern, when they were figuring it out and trying different things and had a lot of that shakeup. That was really the moment that enabled the team that, yeah, I think if we look at that Leverkusen team in terms of what they have, and also like this Marseille team, like, yeah, again, strong first 11, some depth, but not the same depth as Bayern or PSG, but really well organized, had their sort of identity and structure together, and was able to take advantage and close that out. So yeah, I think that's a great point there.
So for those of you who have already supported our Patreon, I want to thank you very much. It's been a lovely kind of trickle of people kind of hopping on board for the special extra podcast we get every week, plus some behind the scenes stuff. Did Patrick get a chance to ask you about your cowboy elements that you seem to appreciate? Because Patrick has some strong opinions about cowboy boots and hats, and it's not that he's anti, but he, as usual, quite strongly opinionated. Did that come up in conversation when you guys were on the air recently?
No, it hasn't. I'm adopted, so I'm originally from Springfield, Massachusetts, which is known for being the birthplace of basketball and not really anything else. But yeah, I think I've really kind of been adopted into it. I think the kind of Western element, the sort of cowboy elements, I think are really fun. It's something that I live in Austin, Texas,
You
and I
don't
think
need
it
to
gives
explain
awesome
yourself to me.
culture.
You're
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
I'm fine with it. I'm an immigrant. Like we adopt things all the time. Texas is
yeah.
a different country to Massachusetts, so
That's
it's
right.
all good. But at some point, you and Patrick should get together and have a conversation about that. Probably though for the extra podcast, so it'll be something that we put over there in the fun space. What did you guys talk about last time?
So we have talked about a couple subjects. So we talked about in the first one was talking about breaking down a low block and some of the strategies that teams need to do that.
So we space off tactical nerd shit for the extra podcast, to protect the rest of you from going deep in that area, but also maybe to give you some useful stuff. In the first episode, I did a little bit of analysis about some Gyökeres shot locations and why he takes some funky shots, and then also a lot about head coach recruitment. And then what was the last one that you talked about?
So we talked about the players that we were wrong about and some of the lessons that we learned, and yeah, player IQ and how much that factors into it, and kind of just some of the lessons that we've learned over the years in this space.
I was looking back at some recent stuff because I need to look at some history from things that I'd done. And occasionally you go back and you do a Twitter search and you're like, oh God, I remember that era. That was really awkward. Or everyone was angry at me, but I turned out to be right. But the thing that I think is really important is to realize that like we're all competitive with ourselves in the prediction space around players because you're always trying to get better. And in some cases, your job matters by being really good, or if you weren't great here, like how can you get better in future years? Because everybody else is also competing against you in the recruitment space while the players are competing on the pitch. And so it's one of those things where inside of football, like everybody kind of understands this. And sometimes you get a chip on your shoulder, like, oh yeah, well, you had this advantage or you had that advantage, but we're kind of all pulling on the same rope in the same way. We're just trying to do better all the time because we want to be the best and create the best teams. So it's a pretty interesting topic and something that, you know, for obviously we say players, kind of continue to learn until their bodies give out and then they can't do it anymore. For people that are analytics minded, like you never really give up on it and you can always continue to learn and do better and find the next thing that's more predictive or help find players earlier or to properly value older players that might be undervalued, which is a thing that's happening more recently.
Yeah, no, I think that's really the lesson here is like it's really easy to talk about the I really knew this player was going to be good and people should have listened to me more and I was correct and I knew it. And really the areas where you learn the most are the ones where you're like I was so confident this was going to work out. I was really like I thought we had our ducks in a row. It was all organized, it was all set, and then it failed. And what was the reason it failed? What could I have known beforehand, and then how can I build that into my decision making process and weigh these things in the right way and make sure that I'm on top of it so that I don't make a mistake like this again. And when a situation comes around that I am confident, now I don't doubt myself and doubt all the other good work that I've done because I've made a mistake. Hopefully I've now learned from it, added to my understanding and process, and then can be better moving forward. And that's really important.
Recruitment is so humbling. And even the best in the world are going to get things wrong at times, and you're like, how did that happen? And that's an important investigation that you have to do after the fact with an open mind, because like sometimes you'll be like, yeah, you were an idiot, and you just got to take this one on the chin. You're like, oh man, that's hard. Like your ego
Yeah.
is hard.
Yeah.
All right, speaking of hard, nice segue. We have the relegation race in the Premier League, which I think is really intriguing. And Patrick and I have talked a little bit about it, but I wanted to get your take on the last buy or sell we've got for this episode, which is: are you buying or selling Nottingham Forest staying up in the Premier League this season?
I'm buying it. I think I'm a Sean Dyche believer. I think
Oh,
there's enough
oh,
talent in this team, and there's enough here that I think they're going to be a team that survives. I think Unfortunately, Burnley are a team that I don't have confidence in. I think they're kind of going down, but I do think that there's going to be some competition for those last spots. But I do think Nottingham Forest have the tools to get themselves out of it. What do you
So
think?
you think Wolves are doomed?
I think Wolves are in a lot of trouble, and they're a team that I keep wanting to be like, there should be some pieces here, but I just think they're in a lot of trouble. If I had to say, if we had asked this question for Wolves, I'd be selling Wolves to the championship right now. Whereas Nottingham Forest, I think that they've got the tools to save themselves.
Yeah, I think the early season Nottingham Forest like basically were weird, and then like they had the behind the scenes problems, but the squad depth is good, and there's definitely talent there. Maybe not elite tier, but for their budget, they've done quite a good job at accumulating like pretty talented players over the last few years. The numbers then under Ange, despite the fact that the the results weren't great, numbers were actually pretty good. And you're like, okay, this is interesting. But the squad wasn't built for that style at all. And you can't put Ange in like mid-season and expect to get anything out of it. I don't think that works at all because he has a really strange and high demand of player knowledge as to when to jump, when not to, like how to play the style, etc. So that obviously was like a big mistake and a very bad stylistic mismatch for the squad quality. And then now you're back to a guy that's basically like, English version of Nuno, pretty good pair of hands. And it's the best. It is by far the most talented squad that Dyche has ever had a hand on.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Nuno, how do you feel about we've sort of got a mix of teams towards the bottom here with West Ham, Leeds are a team that kind of started well, maybe struggling a little bit more as of late. I think
Mm-hmm.
again the trend the last couple seasons has been that the promoted sides go back down. Obviously, Sunderland look like they're in a really good position to buck that trend, but now we're talking about again. A number of teams that have spent years in the Premier League that would, I think, be really upset if they went down or didn't see themselves in that position in preseason. Now, sort of being sucked into that mix, as well as the sort of recently promoted side. So, if you're saying that Nottingham Forest are going to say, who do you see being sucked down? Because if we talk about West Ham, if we're going to say Nottingham Forest, they're in a safe pair of hands,
Sure.
like they had with Nuno. Well,
Somebody's
Nuno's
got to
now
go.
got a team as well, right? Like there is pressure down there now.
So I think Forest are probably staying up. I agree with that. I think that they're close enough to the pack that it's not so bad. I think Burnley are doomed, and actually, I'm betting on Burnley being doomed on a regular basis. So, like, that very much money where my mouth is in that one. And then the last one is an open question. I think that West Ham United are the most likely team to go down. I think that their early season start has caused them to suffer. I think the last couple of seasons of recruitment are definitely things that flagged up as problems. And you can't have like 2 years of bad recruitment in the Premier League as sort of a middle tier team and not see some suffering because they've gotten really good at it. With Sunderland having put up such incredible results, they seem safe and seem like they're not that bad, and a very condensed middle pack, like from like third on down through like 13th in some ways. It's like very tight so far. I think it's a tricky conversation to have right now. And because of that, like I wouldn't be surprised if somebody basically fell out of the pack. Leeds are the team that's sort of most likely, but all of their baseline numbers like look sensible. So I'm not sure that that's the case. Brentford have put together some results and some metrics that look good recently, although their early season was poo. So yeah, we'll see. I would say that I'm very cautious on that. I flagged up West Ham as a long shot relegation bet in the preseason stuff that we did too. So like it's there, and I'm hopeful for it. As an Arsenal fan, I'm not hopeful that City win, although that was also a wager that we did in the preseason as well. So there's some conflictedness in these preseason bets versus actual results. But if I had to pick a team right now, it's West Ham, but I would not be surprised if somebody else kind of shook out and it ended up being really close, and maybe it wasn't one of those sort of four teams that end up getting relegated.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of story to be told here, and with West Ham, you still look at guys like Lucas Paquetá, you look at Jared Bowen, you're like, there's still some tools here. I mean, Obviously, they've sort of changed shape, and this has been the one. But Doof at left fullback, wingback is a guy that has been like really exciting. Like there's pieces here that get you excited about West Ham, where you think they shouldn't be going down. They have some of this top end stuff, and that's a little bit the worry I think I have for this Leeds team is like when they get into these cold, wet winter months where the pitches aren't as pristine as they are at the start of the season, do they have the guys that can get them goals against the really athletic and robust defenses that you've just faced every week in the Premier League? Like every week in the Premier League, you face a team that is going to be tough to score on. Do they have the tools to deal with it?
Well, and West Ham were near the bottom of the table because they were calamitous on set pieces. Calamitous. Yeah. And when you're really bad at that and the rest of the league is really switched onto it, like it doesn't take much of a gap there for you to be like, oh, we're giving up goals left, right, and center, and we're always behind. And so we don't have the talent to be able to overcome that. Leeds feel like they try to play defensively sound and hope that they can grind out results. They look like a championship team that came up that has some level of talent. Like the talent doesn't look out of place, but their scoring and their tempo are pretty low. And yeah, that's kind of where they're at. So I'm intrigued by it. We don't know. And part of being smart in football is saying the times we're like, I don't know. And obviously that's not a great standpoint to take on a buy-sell round, but here we are. For those of us who enjoyed this, please tell your friends, like, subscribe, comment on whatever platform you're seeing on. I think we're about to switch on video on Spotify. We've been asked for that for a long time. We've been working on it, but it does take time for us to do stuff because we're kind of trying to keep a small squad around here, partly because it's fun and easier to manage, and partly because like there aren't that many people that are good enough to make us better, like a January transfer window. So thank you for listening. And for Hayden Van Brewer and myself, I am Ted Knutson, also known as the Bald Guy. We'll see you soon. Bye.